have the honor of having with us today Michael Castro, St. Louis's very first poet laureate.
And you know what? I'm sure there's a bunch of poet people who know.
Poet people,
yes.
the poet people.
Yes. What does that mean, poet laureate? Is that the highest level of honor?
We celebrate his eminence as a poet. We do.
Well, it's the highest honor I'm aware of in St. Louis or in most places for a poet to achieve. And we didn't know it was possible until around fall of this past year.
Oh, so we got a poet laureate designation for the first time in the city of St. Louis.
In the city of St. Louis, yes. Now, this was because of guys like Louis Reed, who was quite an advocate. And we met Aaron Williams. Remember Aaron Williams from seventh grade poetry?
Yes. He was here for an interview in the past.
Yeah.
Yes. So this being in St. Louis, are you from St. Louis originally?
Well, I've been in St. Louis since 1967. I'm originally from New York City.
But we can call you our poet.
Absolutely.
Yes. You have no choice.
Now that you're poet laureate.
Some of you may remember his radio show River Styx on KDNA back in the early 70s.
Is that what brought you to St. Louis?
No, I came as a graduate student at Washington University. We started River Styx with that radio show from 1969 to 72. I also did radio on KWMU in the 1970s, a little show called Ars Poetica, and then for 15 years, Poetry Beat on KDNA.
So you were always a poet.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And knows it.
Yes. And why poetry? Is it something that you just is naturally in you, or how did you come across that for you?
I always wanted to be a writer. I early on as a young boy and then college student, I was more into fiction and journalism. And I would go to, at University of Buffalo, SUNY at Buffalo, where I studied, they had fantastic poets on the faculty and coming in and out. I would attend the readings. I was intrigued by poetry, but I always thought if I read a poem, I should have an instant interpretation of it, or I failed. And that was frustrating because maybe 5 or 10% of the time I could do that.
You mean your own poetry or somebody else's
Someone
poetry?
else's poetry.
To me, it's like, okay, you read somebody's poetry, and it's almost like interpreting song lyrics from the 70s, like Stairway to Heaven, or...
I would hope they're a little deeper than that.
Or White Rabbit's a good one, because people read things into things.
Yes.
So where are you to say, what is the thing you're supposed to... It's different for everyone, right?
Yes, and I had a profound experience with that once. I was in upstate New York visiting a Native American poet friend, Maurice Kenny. Unbeknownst to me, he had set up a reading for me in a federal prison nearby, and I didn't have my poems with me, so I had to reconstruct what I could from memory. And one poem called "The Other Side" had the biggest effect on the prisoners. I mean, it got the most feedback, which was about a man climbing a mountain, being led by his two voices, male and female. They're climbing up a mountain in a blinding snowstorm. By the end of the poem, very surreal poem, by the end of the poem, the man transforms into a wolf. The woman transforms into an eagle flying up over his head. The wolf is leaping after his own tail in futility. These men related to that very strongly.
Interesting.
Because most of them were in there for drug offenses, and the repetitive imagery was snow in this poem, and this whole thing was interpreted by them relating to their experiences with drugs. That wasn't what I had in mind writing the poem.
Right. So, I mean, they were trying to say, like, snow.
But I was moved, and I thought the poem worked in that context.
The context. The context changed the meaning of the poem.
The audience changed the meaning of the poem. The receivers of the poem, it had meaning for them that was powerful.
How can you edit somebody's poem? Because it is, isn't it just
Well, you can't edit. You can make suggestions, and the poet has to deal with it from there. In the case of that poem, I wrote it. I said, yes, that's finished. I couldn't have interpreted at that moment what the poem meant myself. Years later, I thought it had to do with my first marriage. But
Right.
You poets are just trippy people. I think. Now, River Styx continues as an organization, as a literary magazine here in St. Louis. What does it do as an organization? Is there really a poets movement in St. Louis? Is there a poet scene?
There's a huge poet scene. It goes well beyond River Styx. There's many literary and primarily poetry communities in the city. One of the things I'm doing as Poet Laureate is setting up a series, which we've already had one event. We'll have 2 more in May. But in collaboration with some of the poetry presenters, we're developing a Unity Community series, which is really a metaphor and to promote unity community in the larger St. Louis area, to bring some of these communities of writers together to hear each other, which they don't often have the opportunity or choose to do, and to bring their audiences together. And first reading in February was very successful. We have 2 more in May.
You have some things coming up here at the St. Louis Public Library as well. Is that included in what you're talking about now?
Well, April is National Poetry Month, as you know, so I've been probably busier than I'll ever be this month.
Which is interesting because April is the hardest word to rhyme, isn't it? Okay.
Well,
so you are definitely a busy man.
I'm thinking scanning my mind.
If it could be said in a short manner, is there a way to say what people would have to do if they wanted to become Poet Laureate? I mean, if they're a poet...
Go to the STL Poet website, and they list the criteria there.
All right.
But he's got it nailed for 2 years.
Really? That's how long it lasts?
For 2 years.
Yes, I'll be doing this through 2016.
It's kind of like being Miss America.
Exactly. I was thinking you have your crown, and then you pass.
Well, you're supporting the art of poetry. So I'm working with poets, existing poets, but I'm also working with youth poets, trying to support their effort. And there's amazing things going on with high school poets. M.K. Stallings at Herb Arts has brought young poets from all over the high schools in the city together in slam competitions.
And Aaron Williams has such a passion.
And Aaron Williams with
amazing.
his 7th grade poetry foundation, also an amazing thing. I will be appearing to congratulate some of the winners, and the public's invited April 19th to the Book House on Maplewood.
Yeah, the new location on Manchester, right?
Yeah, and that'll be between 1 and 3 in the afternoon.
His latest book is How Things Stack Up. His 15th book, and you can buy it at Amazon.com right now. On April 29th.
On the 29th, there's a program called Bridging Cultures, Poetic Voices of the Muslim World. April 29th is the opening reception and the first event, which is called the Song of the Reed, Rumi, with Dr. Jawed Majadadi. Of course, Rumi is a fabulous poet. I'll be just introducing that program.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much. And this segment is made possible through the generosity of Nighthawk Security. We thank them. They are locally owned and locally operated here in St. Louis since 1974. Home and business security for St. Louis metro area for over 40 years. They will install, service, maintain, and monitor your security system or take over an existing system. Call 846-4600 and ask for Joe.